get started because we have some housekeeping things to take care of as usual. But welcome. Today's presentation is titled The Latino Soul in Grief, Reflections on Loss, Sorrow, and Ritual, presented by Dr. Salvador Treviño. And then we also want to give a big thank you and welcome to Angel Casillas Carmona, who's here from the National Hispanic Latino Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network, or MHCTC, as we've come to refer to them fondly through all of our collaborations with them. Thank you all so much for helping us out and putting us in touch with Dr. Treviño for this wonderful webinar. So wanted to do a few housekeeping things at the beginning. We typically use the term Latinx here at El Futuro. It's something that we've chosen to do to address the issue of the gender binary inherent in Spanish language, where chairs are females, pens or pencils are male, and everything is either male or female, and it doesn't really allow for the gender spectrum, and so Latino, Latina kind of does that. Now, this is something that we do in our training programs. We don't necessarily choose to do it in our clinical work at El Futuro, and that's because it's a term that's not really come from within the community and still not widely used and accepted, but you will hear it in our presentations and in our La Mesita programming. We want to welcome you all, and as for those of you that are return visitors to our La Mesita webinars, you'll know that these are quite interactive. We will invite you all, if you feel comfortable, to turn your videos on and keep them on so that we can engage with one another visually as well as virtually. And there will be times, so throughout the presentation today, Dr. Treviño has been kind enough to allow for chat to be open. So you can all ask questions as we're going through the presentation. But there will also be times where you can unmute and speak your questions and interact with our speaker directly today. And I'm sure everyone's pretty savvy with these, but you can always go to your click and unclick your unmute button. And if you're having trouble with that, you can hit this little arrow here and then hit test speaker and microphone, and it'll kind of walk you through all your sound options to make sure that's connected. For any El Futuro staff who are taking productivity for today's presentation, just a reminder to clock out in Paycheck and then clock back in once the presentation is done. And we want to say a thank you to Greensboro AHEC, who is the Area Health Education Center we partner with for the continuing education credits that will be provided for this webinar. So we provide CE, CME, CEUs, and psychology category A. And the way you do this is register, as you have all done because you're here. Prior to the webinar, we ask that you attend the full hour and a half as we don't offer partial credit. And then there'll be a post-webinar evaluation within a week that we'll want you to complete it within a week. Additionally, today, Angel will be sharing an evaluation for MHCTC's purposes. So just a warning about that. There'll be two separate evaluations. If you can, please help us out and complete both. But in particular, to get your continuing education credits, please complete the Greensboro AHEC one. So we are going to do a quick poll of our 117 and counting participants so far. So please let us know where you are. A lot of our programming is North Carolina centric and aimed to improve the ability of providers across North Carolina to provide services to the Latinx community. But we know, thanks to MHCTC and just in general, we sometimes get folks from outside. So if you hit the other option, please type in the chat where you're coming from today. And can maybe go ahead and publish. And so we see we have a lot of triangle, but really all across North Carolina, and then some folks who are outside of North Carolina. So please let us know in the chat where those folks are coming from. Wisconsin, Salvador, Elizabeth coming from Asheville, very northern Wisconsin, Indiana, Oregon. Wow, cool. So a wide range of attendees. And then we want to get an idea of who's in the room in terms of your position or discipline. So you can select the one that best describes you, or put in other and type in the chat if these options don't capture who you are. I should have put student in there, now that I'm thinking about it. So LME MCO representatives, palliative care, nurse practitioner, retired DO medical student, clinical chaplain. We can publish the poll results. So a lot of social work, and then some counselors, and then a lot of others, as I'm sure. We have a lot of, a huge variety joining us for the webinar. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here and joining us for our webinar today. So I want to introduce our speaker for today. So who is Dr. Salvador Treviño? So Dr. Salvador Treviño is a teacher of professional psychology and has been for over 40 years. And he lectures, I see someone, I think Gail, if you can unmute real quick, thank you. On theories of practice of psychoanalytic psychotherapy, primitive mental states, and Latino behavioral health. And he's really social justice minded in the way that he talks about these issues. And so we will be talking about intersectional and systemic disparities that have impacted the Latinx community in terms of the COVID pandemic and the grief and trauma response that has emanated from that. And he is also the executive director of GCAPS, or Guadalupe Counseling and Psychological Services in Santa Barbara, California. He is coming to us from Santa Barbara, California. It's 7 a.m. over there, so we want to say a huge thank you to Dr. Treviño. But he said he wakes up early and meditates every morning, so he's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed already. And Dr. Treviño, I wonder if I can ask you to turn your video on so folks can see you. There he is. Welcome. And I'll introduce also Angel Casillas Carmona, who comes to us from MHCTC in Puerto Rico. And so Angel received his BA in criminal University of Puerto Rico at Carolina in 2018, and also received a one-year certification of substance related disorders. He completed a master's in health science degree in substance abuse counseling from Universidad Central del Caribe in 2020. And he currently works as a project manager for MHCTC, who focus on delivering presentations such as the one that we'll be seeing today, trying to improve providers' knowledge of the Latinx community and how to provide services in a culturally responsive manner. So with that, I will turn it over to Angel and Dr. Treviño for their presentation, The Latino Soul and Grief, Reflections on Loss, Sorrow, and Ritual. And if we can give a virtual clap for those of you in video as we welcome our speakers.
I'm muted. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Sophia. I'm really glad to be here and be a part of La Mesita webinar series and share some of the knowledge that we have as a team gather throughout this past year. We know that this is not a new topic, beginning grief, but during the past years, all of us have experienced different circumstances due to the world that we now live in because of the pandemic and COVID-19. And this has also disproportionately affected our communities, and the topic of grief and loss hits very close to home to us. So we are very glad to be sharing our knowledge, and Dr. Treviño is a very excellent person to do so. So I'm very glad to be assisting him throughout this presentation. Uh, like Juan mentioned, I work for the National Hispanic and Latino, and we work throughout the nation and its territories to serve communities and providers that serve Hispanic and Latinos. So it's a pleasure, as always, to collaborate with El Futuro, and we hope to continue to do so. Throughout all of our presentations, one thing is very constant, and is the use of language, because as we know, language matters, and we focus on using person first and free of labels language that's not judgmental and based on strengths. So that is very important. This is a brief disclaimer that although all of our presentations are free of charge, thanks to our grant from SANSA, the views of this presentation reflect only the views of the speakers, and by any means of those of SANSA. So without any other thing to share, I will let you all with Dr. Treviño to share his wonderful knowledge. Dr. Treviño, always a pleasure.
Thank you, Juan. Muchas gracias, Juan. I want to thank everyone for inviting me, and I want to thank you for registering for this webinar. You have other things to do. This is Friday. For a lot of you, it is the last training in the morning, and the rest of the day you're going to continue with your life. I want to thank you for making time and coming here to this webinar. You didn't have to, but you chose to. So I want to thank you for that. I want to begin this presentation by giving a shout out to all the mental health and social workers that are known and not known, that are the backbone of the work that I do. Without these individuals, I would not be able to do the work that I do with any degree of success. I need all the help that I can get. And I want to make sure that the professionals and paraprofessionals that are doing this work, without any fanfare, without any recognition, they go about doing this work very steady. They do it very competently. They do it with a great deal of compassion. And these are the individuals that our patients asked for by name. And it is to these individuals that I dedicate my presentation to. Like I said, they are the backbone of the work that I do. This morning's presentation is on the Latino soul and grief. It is on the inherent trauma of Latino communities and other communities of color impacted by coronavirus and the pandemic that has gripped the world. This morning's webinar is also about hope and resilience. It's not all about darkness, but there has to be a light at the end of that darkness. And so I want to make sure that I highlight the resilience of the patients that I see, the resilience of Latino communities, the resilience of communities of color, despite the overwhelming stresses, social justice stresses, medical stresses, economic stresses. Despite all of that, our communities continue to move forward. We call that resilience. I want to make sure that we cover that. I also want to make sure that you understand where I'm coming from and where does Salvador get all this information from. My mother would say, ¿De dónde sacas estas ideas, hijo? My mother would say, where do you get these ideas from? Where do you pull them from? So I want to go over that. Next slide, please. My theoretical knowledge frame is primarily qualitative phenomenological. I adhere to the basic principles that people are experts in their lived experiences. If I want to understand what depression is like for my patient, not only do I consult the technical literature and my training, but I also consult my patient. My patient is the expert in his or her lived experiences. I also want to emphasize that knowledge can be constructed by listening to people describe their lived experiences. Next slide, please. One of the basic tenets that I adhere to is that meanings of emotional experiences change over time. How a patient reacts to stresses and losses in their lives, the meaning that is derived from those experiences, that meaning will change over time. And this is what separates psychoanalytic qualitative science from evidence-based science, where there is one universal meaning, where there is one universal truth. The qualitative phenomenological approach really emphasizes that meanings of emotional experiences will change over time. I'm going to be looking at this, especially if I am tracking depression of my patients. The meaning is going to contribute, the meaning of that lived experience is going to contribute. It's going to scaffold, support depression, or it's going to resolve it. So meanings change over time, and I am looking to change the meaning of some of their experiences. We call that the corrective emotional experience. That's a technique that I will be covering in this webinar. Okay. The other tenet that I adhere to is that there are multiple truths, subjectivity versus one universal truth of evidence-based practice. Evidence-based practice is very powerful. It's very, very strong. It relies on the minted currency of facts. Qualitative phenomenological science adheres to the idea that there are multiple truths, that truths change over time. Now we're looking at meaning. And I adhere to that because the patients, my patients who come to see me, will tell me that's not as important as it is now, or it's not as serious as it is now, or it's not as, it has resolved itself. Before, I thought I was very anxious, and I was, but something has changed. These are the truths and the meanings that change over time, and that's what patients bring to me. So I want to pay very close attention to that. I also adhere to subjectivity. Subjectivity is just as important as objectivity and understanding lived experiences. Again, subjectivity goes to, if I want to understand what depression is like for the patient that I am seeing, I'm going to rely on the subjective description of that mood. Again, subjectivity is just as important as objectivity. I try to hold attention in the work that I do, and in the presentation that that I'm giving today. I try to hold attention between cognitive behavioral therapy and psychodynamic therapy, yoked to facilitate a scientific frame of inquiry and understanding. The science in qualitative phenomenological approach, the science in the therapy that I do with the Latino community is very systematic. It is based on careful observation. It is based on identifying patterns. It is based on allowing new information to emerge as I continue to see the patient. Okay? These are the methods of evidence-based science, by the way. I'm using the same methodology of the hard sciences to try to understand what is the lived experiences of the patients that I see. Next slide, please. The basic framework that I use when I am working with Latinos, the basic framework that I use when I'm working with patients of color, is that I need to establish my professional credibility as a properly trained, knowledgeable, and devoted practitioner of the healing arts. This is what I do to make a living. And when I am working with immigrants, that type of authority in the work that you do carries a lot of weight. So whenever I am working with patients, whenever I am presenting at webinars, I need to establish my professional credibility. I know what I'm talking about. I don't know a lot, but what I do know, I know it very well. This is my attitude that I convey to the patients. There is a great deal of humility in the approach that I take. I may not know everything in this world or about your life, but what I do know about suffering, what I do know about depression, and what I do know about healing, I know it well. The idea that the therapeutic alliance, how I relate to my patient and how my patient relates to me, is the true agent of change. I want to emphasize that again. It is the therapeutic alliance that is the true agent of change, not the theory of that particular approach, not the techniques of the particular approach, but it is the therapeutic alliance. How I relate to my patient heart to heart is what's going to be the agent of change. Now, I'm not pulling that out of my ear. This is based on research. And I want to, I did submit a reference page and a recommended reading for the audience, for those of you who want to follow up on some of my references. The idea that the therapeutic alliance, making it so that the relationship is so formal as well as informal, it is personal, it is intimate, and it is what allows the patient to believe in you, is what allows the patient to accept the theoretical interventions that you may be using, to accept that because they believe in you. Now that's a therapeutic alliance. The Rogerian approach to psychotherapy works very well with the Latino community, works very well with Latino patients. Deep respect for your patient and deep respect for their subjective experiences is the medicine, not the theory of cognitive behavioral therapy, not the techniques of cognitive behavioral therapy. And you can use that understanding with all the major approaches to the corrections of behavioral disorders. Okay? It's the therapeutic alliance that is a true agent of change. It is important for me to be cognizant that I have a shared worldview with my patients, that what they are saying, I have some familiarity, that how they see the medical staff, how they see the psychologist, how they see the social worker, which by the way is an image of abundance. Whenever we are working with communities of color, whenever we are working with the Latino community, whenever we are working with low-income patients, how they experience us is the image of abundance. And I want you to be aware of that because that does impact the way they interact with us. I also want to promote the idea that change is possible. Change is possible beginning with supporting my patient's request for an appointment. Now that shows good judgment. If my patient is having problems in the community, problems at home, problems with their love relationships, okay, they'll pick up the phone, they'll call me. Now that is an expression of good judgment, and that is the beginning of hope. And whenever I make contact with my patient on the first call, I want to make sure that I support and validate them reaching out to someone to try to improve their lives. The next slide, please. I want to define some terms that I want to be using here quite often, and it's in the title. Soul refers to a person's genuineness of depth and lived experiences. The genuineness of depth and lived experiences. It's a soulful experience, we hear that. I'm referring to that experience that all of us go through from time to time. That is what I'm referring to as soul. It's genuine, it's heartfelt, puro corazón, as they say in the community. Okay, that's soul. Soul is psyche as well. Soul is the totality of our remembered and forgotten lived experiences. Our soul, our psyche, nuestra alma, is the totality of what we remember and what has been forgotten in terms of our lived experiences. The mind, the soul, el corazón, nunca se olvida. It doesn't forget. whenever we experience a significant a trauma and we don't remember it, it has been forgotten, it has been repressed, but it does bubble up. Now, that's what I'm referring to as the psyche, as the soul. Soul is what we feel when we are emotionally moved by divine beauty. Para mí, divine beauty is the image of Guadalupe. Now that is so. When I do my daily affirmations, after I meditate and I'm ready to see my patients, I do a daily affirmation and I say a very quick prayer to Guadalupe. Ayúdame a comprender, Lupita. Help me understand. Ayúdame a ver la luz. Help me see the light. By light, I'm referring to insight. Help me see the insight of the work that I am doing. Okay, that is the soulful experience of being in the presence of divine beauty. Okay, I'm also referring to how we are emotionally moved. Soul is what we feel when we are emotionally moved by social injustice. It is the anger, it is the sadness, it is the tears that I experience when I see what is going on at the border, when I see the thousands and thousands of children unaccompanied crossing the border. When I have an emotional reaction to that, that is my soul. The soul is the I who cries in sorrow, who cries and mourns. Nuestra alma es la persona que llora. Our soul is the person who cries. That is what I am referring to. The root meaning of psychopathology, by the way, is ailing soul, the soul in grief. The root meaning of therapy is to breathe life, to attend. Thus, tending the soul in grief is the work of psychotherapists, who were originally referred to by Freud as doctors of soul. So for all of you who have registered for this seminar, if you are doing behavioral health, if you are doing social work, clinical social work, if you are a medical social worker, okay, you are doing the soul. You are doing the work for the soul. You are breathing life. You are attending to what is ailing that person. Okay, this is what I'm referring to as soul. Next slide, please.
Dr. Treviño, I just wanted to
Sí.
pause this, and I think we had a question from Carolina.
Sí, cómo no, cómo no.
Okay, I'm going to invite you to unmute and ask your question. I think you're muted still. There you
Hello,
go.
yes. You were talking about abundance. I would like to hear more what you have to say about that.
Yes, ma'am. When my patients come to see me, when my patients come to see you, and if you're working with a community of color and they are low income, when they come to see you, they see a person who is better dressed than I am. They are seeing a person who is more articulate than I am. They are seeing a person who looks healthier than I am. They are seeing a person who is working and I am not. You are the image of abundance. You have so much compared to you. I don't have as much as you do. Now, analysts would refer to that as a transference reaction. This is how they experience us. I was supervising this one doctoral student who would show up to his practicum side in his Porsche. And everyone would see him drive up in his Porsche. Okay? A lot of his patients would not see him. That came up in supervision. And the idea is ask your patients what's going on, I directed him to do. The idea is that he looked very wealthy. Why would he want to even talk to me? That's a transference reaction. That's what I refer to as our patients see us as an image of abundance.
Thank you very much.
¿Cómo no? Otras preguntas? No hay otras preguntas, other questions?
Other questions of what we've covered so far? You can feel free to unmute or put them in the chat. I think Dr. Treviño, there have been a few comments about how much people are appreciating your approach and just your general consciousness of intersectional issues and of going beyond the evidence and looking at the human beings that we're working with.
All right, good to know. Good to know that I'm on the right track. The next slide, please. Oh, there's another question. Otra
Yeah, I
pregunta.
see. Mariana, you can go ahead.
Hello, everybody, and hi, Dr. Treviño.
Buenos días.
I'm really enjoying everything that I'm hearing from you. I do have a question that it bothers me, maybe not knowing exactly how to help the families that I work with. When you mentioned, having to see a specialist for mental health, I see in our Latino families that they have like a no karma, but like they feel like something is really wrong, or they feel like ashamed to have to or be in need of this help. How do you approach that?
I will let them know that when you call me, it's a very personal call. I acknowledge the deep personal nature of going to a psychologist. I acknowledge them that they have the capacity to do that because this is what they do when they go confess their sins. This is what they do when they go to church. This is what they do when they have intimate moments with their partners. They're able to reveal something about themselves that maybe they could be a little embarrassed about or ashamed. I offer an explanation about shame and about embarrassment. Latinos, we come from a sociocentric culture where relationships and the social nature of things are important to us. This is why it hurts us tremendously when the pandemic, public health started to tell us, you got to stay away from each other. You can't go over there. Para un Latino, no darle un abrazo, for a Latino not to hug someone, especially someone that you know, a good friend, tus abuelos, your grandparents, to not do that really hurts us. It is something that we rely on for nurturance. We're talking about social relationships. Okay? Sociocentric cultures, sociocentric families use shame and embarrassment to promote family coming together as a family cohesion. Shame, que no te da vergüenza, mira cómo te vistes. Aren't you embarrassed at the way you're dressing? Shame to bring in conformity. ¿Por qué me hablas así? ¿Qué van a decir la otra persona? Why do you talk to me like that? What are other people going to say? Shame to create manners, to reinforce respect. So shame for the Latino is exposed whenever they call a behavioral therapist. So I try to give them information to where those emotions could be coming from. I also make sure to tell them this. Cuando ustedes entran a mi oficina, when you come into my office, cerramos la puerta. We close the door para tener privacidad so that we can have privacy. Porque lo que usted me va a decir y las preguntas que le voy a hacer son preguntas muy personales. Because of what we're going to talk about and the questions I want to ask you are going to be very, very personal. That's why we close the door. Por eso cerramos la puerta. I also tell them this. Le voy a preguntar unas preguntas que yo los pregunto a todos a mis pacientes. I want to ask you some questions that I ask all of my patients. No es porque soy metiche. It's not because I'm nosy, but because I need to understand. ¿Me da permiso? Do you give me permission to ask you those questions? Everyone says yes. So if I take some time relying on personalismo, which is a strength that Latinos, not only Latinos, you have that also in other cultures, but in particular Latinos, that personalismo is what sets the tone for the therapeutic alliance. Once I have the therapeutic alliance, I think pretty much I've neutralized the stigma and the shame of logging on and talking to me or coming to GCAPS and having a personal appointment with me. Okay? I'm very much aware of the stigma. I spent as much time as I need to neutralize that stigma by offering information, by saying things like, ay, Dios mío, qué vergüenza, ¿en qué se quedó pensando? By reflecting the social-centric nature of our traditions and making statements on how embarrassing, how did you manage that? Acknowledging the stigma while trying to neutralize it. That's how I would approach it.
Thank you, Dr. Treviño.
Just get a feel for the way I'm responding to my patients, get a feel. Si tienen más preguntas, if you have more questions beyond the webinar, con mucho gusto, you give me a call, you send me an email, you have all my contact information, and I'll continue to generate more information for you, okay? Oh, can we go back a little bit? Okay. Sorrow, loss and sorrow, pérdida y dolor. Una de las cosas que quiero mencionar, one of the things that I want to mention is that Latinos, we share a trait, even though the various regions of Latin America, you have different variations of the culture, of the traditions. We are a diverse culture, but yet at the same time, we share some commonalities. And with the understanding that the ultimate authority of what it's like for a patient is the patients themselves, I do want to go over some similarities that we share in various forms. We are compassionate, and we are prone to melancholy, melancolia. When you listen to, especially Mexicanos, when you listen to the rancheras, when you listen to the songs that are popular, it's always about a broken heart. It's always about un hombre que me dejó, una mujer que me dejó. El amor duele mucho, the painfulness of love. Now, what makes us susceptible to that can be traced to the conquest, can be traced to what happened when Europeans came over and started to impose their traditions while erasing the indigenous traditions. That type of conquest led to a great deal of infanticide, parents killing their children. It led to a great deal of suicidality. The indigenous communities were killing themselves. It led to a disorder of immunity. People were getting ill with these new diseases that these European travelers came over here with. When we look at what happened to the community at the conquest, we see on a collective level, on a cultural level, a melancholy, a depression, and that depression is passed on intergenerationally. And this is what we are experiencing now. Whenever we listen to music about a lost love, losses are cumulative. Every single time you experience a loss, it's going to pull all of your other losses in your life, and it's going to come forward in a compressed fashion. This is what patients say. Pues no sé de dónde vienen estas lágrimas, nomás, no sé por qué lloro. I don't know where these tears are coming from. I don't know why I cry. Those are the losses that have been repressed. Those are the losses that have been forgotten. But the mind, la alma, doesn't forget. See, these are the losses that come forward that are in our dreams. It lacks the consciousness because they have been repressed. It lacks the ability to recall them on a conscious level, only to bubble up as we're dreaming. Okay, these are the losses of some kind of death. And especially now, when the Latino community is experiencing a great deal of mortality around coronavirus, these families are not only pulling their personal losses, but on a collective level, it's pulling the losses of their culture. When a community of people experience depression, imagine your family, imagine this family losing the grandparents and the parents, leaving teenagers, leaving them, the parents and the grandparents have passed from coronavirus. It's only the teenagers that are left. Think about what happens to them. Okay? The isolation, the loneliness brought on by the death is going to be overwhelming. Now, imagine their neighbor going through the same thing. Imagine their neighbor going through the same thing. So what we now have is a community in the grips of losses, collective loss. Now we are looking at a culture, at a community that is grieving. And this is what we are seeing right now with a pandemic and the coronavirus and the vaccinations. Now, what are the results of all of this? How do we know all of this is going on? We see a history of behavioral problems with children of the Latinos. We see a history of domestic violence, of substance abuse, of mood disorders. Okay? These are the symptoms of the loss and the death that is cumulative as a result of the pandemic. Okay? The loss of employment because of COVID-19, because of the pandemic, is very significant, especially for immigrants. When immigrants come to the US, and I'm not talking about the visiting scholars at universities that are well taken care of. I'm not talking about the executives that are recruited and hired at Silicon Valley. They're well taken care of. Even those immigrants, I'll tell you, experience some type of cultural dislocation as they are adjusting, as they are acculturating. But I'm talking about the poor. I'm talking about the immigrants that come to the US that are trying to escape political, religious persecution, cartel persecution. These are the people that we see at the border. I'm talking about them. When they come and they're coming to work, voy a trabajar. Eso es lo que yo quiero. Quiero trabajar, quiero mantener a mi familia, quiero vivir una vida tranquila. I just want to work, I want to support my family, and I want a peaceful life. Now, when they are released because of COVID-19 or because of the, you can't work here anymore, can you work at home? A lot of the patients that I work with are unable to transition from being at the factory to working at home. Now that loss is significant. I'm also looking at the anhedonia, the emotional flatlining, as manifestations of the soul in grief. La alma en el dolor. These are the losses. These are the things that I am looking at that lets me know that the patients that I am seeing, how they are reacting to the pandemic. Loss is cumulative. I want you to know that. Not always observable, but these losses can gradually gnaw, erode the foundation of what it's like to be a human being, what it's like to be a Latino, what it's like to be a parent, a loving son, a loving daughter. Those losses begin to accumulate and they appear to attach themselves to your previous losses. Okay. Next slide, please.
Dr. Treviño, I just wondering if I could just ask a quick question. So Cynthia Royals Wilson asks if you can address the issue of some children or grandchildren feeling responsibility for having brought COVID into the home and maybe gotten a family member sick. And how can we provide support to these kids around feelings of guilt and responsibility?
The treatment of choice for children is family therapy. Okay, the treatment of choice for children is family therapy. The treatment of choice with early adolescents is family therapy. That's a treatment of choice. Individual therapy is powerful. It's often an adjunct to family therapy. Okay, but I want to emphasize that again. The treatment of choice for children is family therapy, and this is for Latino and non-Latino as well. And the primary reason for that is because of the deep dependency that the children have on their parents. Children, younger children in particular, are egocentric, meaning that they believe that the world wakes up when they wake up. They open their eyes, there's the sun. They get sleepy, the sun goes away. So they see themselves as the center of the universe. With Latinos in particular, Latinos are child-centered. When you go to a party, you go to a barbecue, you will see that the children are playing over here and the parents are over here. As soon as one child begins to cry, all the parents stand up and all the mothers look to see who that child was that was crying. Now that's child-centric. So I need to recognize that. I need to have some understanding that the child feels responsible for what happened in the family. I gave my family COVID. Porque ellos me dicen, they tell me how they got ill. Okay, now I need to let them know that that is simply not true, that you killed your parents or you died your parents. I need to figure out a way to address that. I need to figure out a way that all of us, this entire family, including me as a psychologist, are at risk for being infected. I create an opportunity for that discussion to happen. I am specifically supporting and validating the child's lived experiences. The child is going to be looking at the parents for guidance. I need to work and strengthen the parents or whoever is in charge of the child to continue the support and validation that it was not you, but it was the illness. It is the pandemic. It is the virus that's creating all this fear in all of us. I always ask the child, when it gets very scary at night and you are lying there in the dark and it is getting very scary for you, who do you go to? Who do you call out? ¿Qué haces? I want to make sure that I reconnect that. I want to make sure that I emphasize that connection. I want to make sure that that connection is reinforced. I want to make sure that the child has a really good nonverbal connection with the parent or whoever is taking care of them. That's where I would go. I look at the stigma. I look at the embarrassment. I have an understanding developmentally of what the child is going through. I then frame my interaction based on that developmental level. Otras preguntas, other questions?
I think Dr. Treviño, Cynthia is kind of clarifying. I guess it's kind of ties in with the conversation about disparities, for those families that still have to continue to go out and work and helping them to deal with the rock and the hard place of having to go to work because of needing to provide for family, but also meaning that that's incurring risk for the rest of the family.
It is, this is what I would say. It is difficult. I'm going to acknowledge the reality. La cosa está pesada, if I say it in Spanish. Eso es cierto. Pero tenemos que trabajar, ¿verdad? We have to work. ¿Qué vamos a hacer? Here's the Latino saying that I use a lot. Pues si no hay otra vida, ¿verdad? Sin el trabajo, ¿qué vamos a hacer? Without work, I am not going to the identity, the cultural Latino identity. Si no hay trabajo, ¿qué vamos a hacer? ¿Cómo vamos a mantener nuestra familia? I'm not going to tap into the strong relationship that parents have with children. No, tenemos que hablarle a nuestros hijos. We have to talk to our kids. Tenemos que usar la mascarilla. We want to make sure that we use the mask. Póngase la mascarilla.
Thank you, Dr. Treviño.
Here's a conceptualization that I want to share with you, with all of you. A person who has disconnected from their traditions, and by traditions, I'm talking about culture. And by traditions and culture, I'm talking about the family, because the family is the carrier of culture. It is through our family that we learn traditions. It is through our family that we become socialized. It is through our family that we develop and learn gender expectations. So when I talk about culture, I talk about the family. Okay? I want to emphasize with the family how they can continue to love their children despite the fear. I emphasize that. I'm very much aware that the concept, the person who has disconnected from their traditions becomes symptomatic. I'll say it again. A person who has disconnected from their traditions, from their family, becomes symptomatic. So I need to reconnect with their traditions. I need to reconnect with their culture. I need to reconnect with the inherent positive nature of our traditions as a way of dealing with shame, as a way of dealing with a very sensitive topic of how do we address this illness with our children. A parent talking to their child is very cultural. It's very traditional. It's iconic. A parent talking to their child, a child going to their parents is cultural, is traditional. It's iconic. Anything that interferes with that, one of those two or both of them are going to become symptomatic, especially if that disconnect becomes chronic. I have more things to say, but that would be another lecture. So I'll leave it at that. Otras preguntas, other questions? Next slide, please.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any right now, Dr. Treviño. You can keep going.
Grief, as it is used in this presentation, is a physical sensation of loss. Cuando uno está llorando, when one is crying, cuando uno está chillando, when one is weeping, it takes our breath away. When our body has recovered and has taken in the healing nature of crying, the healing nature of crying, typically a person will do this. Almost a punctuation of that lived experience. Now that's grief. That's a physical sensation of loss. Physical pain is grief. Now for some patients who are very depressed, depression can hurt physically. Okay? That's grief. Llorando, crying. The deep emotional distress of anxiety, pena, duelo, is grief. Whenever your patients cry with you, they are grieving. Okay? Now, this type of sorrow, this type of grief can be intergenerational, can be historical, reflect the historical harm done to communities. This is what is attached, the intergenerational trauma, the intergenerational mood disorders on a collective level attaches itself to the personal grief, to the personal sorrow. Now the tears, as the way I use them in the work that I do, are conceptualized as the ethereal fluid that washes the soul. I get this straight from my mom. Mi mamá era curandera. Ella me decía, esas lágrimas que tú tienes, chavita, te están limpiando la alma. No tengas vergüenza porque estás llorando. The tears that you have, chavita, They're cleansing your soul. Don't be embarrassed because you're crying. Okay? I still use that same conceptualization that my mother taught me. Now, that's using my upbringing to allow me to be culturally sensitive, to develop my own cultural competence. For those of you in the audience, I want to ask you, if you want to develop your cultural competence so that it becomes second nature, research your family. Look at how your family taught you. Look at your ideas of what is normal, what is abnormal, what is healthy, what is unhealthy, what's illness and what is healing, what is love and what is hate. All of that stuff you get from your family. If you want to be culturally competent, more so that you will not get in books, turn to your family. Next slide, please. Ritual refers to ceremony, observance, and it promotes healing. Coming to see you on a weekly basis is ritualistic. When your patients come to see you, when you check in on Sunday night or Monday morning and you look at your emails to see what is in store for you for that week, okay, that is very ritualistic. How you greet your patients, how you say goodbye is very ritualistic. How you say good morning, how you eat, todo ese relajo, all of that is ritualistic. When we disconnect ourselves from our tradition, when we disconnect ourselves from our family, we lose ritual. Ritual is very, very important when I am bonding with my patient, and that bonding allows them to return and return and return and return. Behavioral health, weekly appointments, all of that is ritualistic. I want to make sure that I maintain object constants, that I maintain that ritual. I don't deviate from that because I want to restore the Latino soul in grief. I want to restore rituals that have been absent in their lives or have been disrupted because of the pandemic. Weddings, for example, funerals, for example, how we say hello, how we say goodbye. All of that is ritualistic, significant social meaning. We lose that, we lose a great deal. And this is what social distancing has done to the Latino communities or communities that are social centric in nature. Rituals create, facilitate identity. Every morning when I do my affirmations and I do my daily prayer to Guadalupe, it reinforces my identity as a Latino, as a Guadalupano, as someone who believes in the spirituality, not necessarily religiosity, but the spirituality. And by spiritual, I'm referring to the belief that something is greater than you in this universe. Every time I am at awe at someone's suffering, at what I hear my patients tell me, okay, I am in the presence of spirituality. Every time I enjoy un tamal or the wonderful scones that my beautiful wife makes for me, when I make those yummy sounds, I am in the presence of everyday spirituality because it goes beyond words. You cannot describe the lived experience. You can only feel it. That's spirituality. Loss of ritual promotes social alienation. It promotes social alienation, loss of personal, religious, and spiritual meaning. The patient becomes symptomatic from a disconnection of culture, loss of ritual. Next slide, please. Psychosocial stressors. I want to say something about this gentleman behind me. Very nice man. I asked him if I can take a picture with him. He agreed. So I just wanna point that out. This is not a bad guy here, but it does capture the relationship between Latinos and law enforcement, or what we are seeing now play out in the daily newspaper, in the daily news shows, what is happening to the persecution of people of color. Voting rights have been dismantled, making it difficult for people to express their voices. Now, psychosocial stressors, how does that kind of stuff impact? How does it impinge on the individual patient? Fear of going out. Let me give you an example of a concrete reality, something that has happened to my family, to a family that I am seeing. In domestic violence, we often instruct the parent, the spouse, the victim who's being abused, have an escape plan. Have your a suitcase ready, so in case you need to leave, when that person comes home drunk and you know it's going to lead to violence, you need to have an escape plan. Take the suitcase that's filled with some clothes, important papers, and we're going to go down to my sister's house. The mother tells the child, we're going to go down to your aunt's house. Okay, now check this out. I am hearing the same preparations for going out and going out to the market out of fear that they're going to be arrested from ICE, or out of fear that they're going to get ill. With these instructions to the children, I want to go to the store to go get some milk and eggs. Always milk and eggs. That's the basic. Always milk and eggs. I'll be back. Si no regreso en 30 minutos, hijo. If I don't come back in 30 minutes, quiero que agarres la mochila que tenemos aquí y vete ya con tu tía. If I don't return in 30 minutes, get your backpack and go to your aunt's house. Y allá me esperas, and you wait for me over there. Porque me pescaron, mijo. Because ICE got me, and I'm not coming back. Probably not coming back. So get the stuff and go to your aunt's house if I don't return in 30 minutes. The same planning that we hear in the work of domestic violence with victims, we are hearing it now. I am hearing it now. Okay, this is how the pandemic, this is how the immigration issue impinges on the everyday individual lives of my patients. Next slide. Here's a powerful image. It was recreated to make a point. This comes from the 1930s. In the 1930s, over 1 million Mexicans, most were children and American citizens, were rounded up in mass deportation and sent to Mexico, where they were not given a welcome, by the way, because they were American citizens. Now, Los Angeles County got an award, would win awards for their efficiency of rounding up, and I'm using that word deliberately, rounding up Mexicans, taking them from their homes, paying their taxi to take them down to the border by bus, by train. They were so efficient at what they did that they got awards. Now, the idea of how do you transport large numbers of people efficiently? During that time, during the 30s, Europe was also going through some changes. Germany was paying attention to what was going on, how the Americans were able to move large numbers of people during this time. It became the blueprint for how the Nazis would transport large numbers of Jews. Got that from the Americans. They got that from the 1930s when America was deporting large numbers of individuals, Mexicans. Like I said, most were American citizens. Now, That type of historical harm, that type of historical trauma is never forgotten. It's passed on from generation to generation. A wrong has been done to a community. We see that in the Middle East right now. A wrong has been done to this culture. Intergenerationally, the younger generation has now been assigned to payback. And this is what we see. Next slide, please. These are not the patients that I see, but this is what the people that I work with look like. Mostly women, children. Okay. Sharing a house. Some of these kids go to school, some of them don't. Now imagine a 1-bedroom apartment or a 2-bedroom apartment, and the children are on homeschooling. No one has a computer. Everyone seems to have a cell phone, but the cell phone is limited. So this is what the child uses to log on to school. But there's no Wi-Fi. It keeps going in and out. So they go down to McDonald's because at McDonald's they have the hotspot and it's good. It's a good reception over there. So they're going to school in the McDonald's parking lot. Check this out. These are the stresses that make life sometimes unbearable. This overcrowding contributes to the stress and contributes to the physical health or the deterioration of that health. When I was seeing patients in person, this is what my patients would show up. This is how they show up. I'm only seeing one family, but they're all living together and they only have one car when it works. And so they all travel down to my office. We're going to wait for Chapa. Aquí la esperamos. We're going to wait in the waiting area. I ended up doing group family therapy. I might as well have them all come in because they were all living together, all sharing the same problems. Okay. This is the stress. The stress. Look at the stress in their faces. Next slide, please. I call your attention to the slide on the right, the boat, people in Africa. La misma cosa está pasando over here. The same thing over here is happening in other parts of the world. Right now, the world is experiencing a great deal, the largest number of people moving from one place to another. The largest mass migration the world has ever known, has ever seen right now. In the midst of a pandemic. Check it out. The stresses of immigration, the stresses of coming to the US in a train, La Bestia, that's a center photo, exacerbated by the pandemic. People fall off the train, get mutilated, they get killed, people witnessing all this stuff. I had this one frustrated colleague tell me, why do they keep coming if they're not being allowed into the US? Well, check it out. It's not a pleasant experience to be at the border. It's not a pleasant experience to migrate, move the way my patients are moving. But it's better than staying there. Life is better than staying put. Next slide, please. The coronavirus stresses specifically, things are getting a little better, but pretty much we're still last in line. A lot of wealthy individuals, a lot of wealthy politicians cut at the head of the line. They're getting vaccinated first. This is disparity in its purest form. Healthcare disparity in its purest form. The social isolation that's brought on by the coronavirus, by the pandemic, by the public health instructions, goes to the heart of the Latino community because we are a social-centric community. We believe in relationships. We give hugs. When we eat, we invite everybody. At my family, if people would say, why are you guys fighting and arguing? We're not, we're just loud. That's a sociocentric nature of the Latino community. And it hits us very hard. Next slide, please. Basic information here. The loss, the human loss is staggering. What do experts tell us right now about children and education? The pandemic has caused a great deal of harm. References terms like a lost education, lost year. One year of not going to school or 1 year of not learning at your optimal level is significant, especially for children. The social emotional development, the playing in the playground, experts say it is so significant, that play. Well, guess what? They're being told, don't do that. We can't do that. This is how the coronavirus is impacting Latino communities. This is how it's impacting children, Latino children. I am very, very fortunate, and not a day goes by that I acknowledge that to Guadalupe, that I am very fortunate that I can switch from seeing someone in person to doing telemedicine, online counseling. I was very, very fortunate. But I also know that I cannot keep doing that, not with the community that I work with, because it is the personal nature of working with Latinos. And it is that interaction that we have with our patients that is the true agent of change. Not the theory, not the techniques, but the true agent of change is what happens between two people. Next slide, please. It has changed the way we educate our children. They've experienced loss of interest, loneliness, a great deal of loneliness, loss of social, emotional stimulation and development. Esa es una pérdida. That is a significant loss to children in communities. It's changed the way we worship. It changed the way we celebrate marriage and birth, the way we grieve, the way we mourn the deceased. Loss of significant sources of meaning. This is what the pandemic has done. It has changed the way we greet, the way we interact, say goodbye to one another. It goes to the heart of what it means to be a Latino. We've lost that. What allows a person to recover from that and what provokes further deterioration is early upbringing. Medical doctors would refer to that as pre-morbid functioning. I'm aware of the time. I only have 15 minutes left, and I can go on and on and on and on. Ya cállese, por favor, Dr. Treviño. ¿No tienen preguntas? You have any questions?
Yeah, and I think we had one earlier, if I can go to it. I think it was, if you can talk about, so this is from Emma Beneke, can you address the countertransference and sustainability of holding or how to sustainably hold space for the work for the providers on the call? Because this is difficult work and it's taxing. How do we protect ourselves as we try to provide best services?
First thing that I would recommend for the clinicians, the service providers, the caseworkers, the social workers, is to take care of yourself by, when your shift is over, put the work down. Don't take it home with you. As much as possible, do not take it home with you. You need to allow time for your experience and your knowledge to rise. And you do that by leaving it alone. For the bakers in the audience, you know the significance of allowing the yeast to do its thing. Leave the dough alone. You've worked it, leave it alone, cover it up, come back in a few hours and it's doubled in size. The same thing with your knowledge. To take care of yourself, okay? Have some kind of self-care regime. For me, it's exercise, meditation. It's humor. I love being with my daughter and my wife. I always connect with my family. That's tending to your own personal soul. Okay. The other is I reach out to my colleagues. I consult with my colleagues on a regular basis. Without that consultation, it becomes very lonely for me. I start to believe in my own stuff. I need someone to check it out. I have blind spots, so consulting with others helps me recover from the countertransference. If my countertransference continues to bother me, I take that to my own analyst, my own therapist, because it is me that's being activated. The other thing that I have learned over the years is my reaction to the patient, my countertransference to the patient, may be important diagnostically. What's that all about? In other words, am I feeling for my patient? Am I imagining things for my patient? Am I thinking of things that my patient considers unthinkable? After all, we are in a relationship. And in relationship, the most powerful communication is nonverbal. Ahora, eso es puro curanderismo. That's folk medicine as well. But curanderos don't use terms like countertransference and transference. Those are the European trained curanderos. We call them psychoanalysts. But esa es la misma cosa. Estamos hablando de la misma cosa. We're talking about the same thing. That when I am in a relationship with you, whatever you find uncomfortable, in some way, that's communicated to me. And it gives rise to my images. It gives rise to my emotions. So I want to consider those. Should I share it with my patient? Or is it more important for me to know that and not necessarily for my patient to know my thinking? I consult with my colleagues. That's all that I can come up with right now.
And I have another question here from Ana Hernandez. How do you invite your clients to do grief work when they feel that talking about it only creates more pain?
It only creates more pain because you are acknowledging it, I tell them. And acknowledging your pain makes you more sensitive and gives you the strength to bear it. And you know that you're getting strong and you're bearing it when you cry, when you sleep, when you dream. And whenever you have those experiences, you have this place for you to talk to. You have me to talk to, and we can try to understand that. That's how the dialogue would go. I would align myself with them. I would share something personal that only takes 2 seconds to share. Así me pasa la misma cosa. The same thing happens to me. 2 seconds. That's personal disclosure. Very quickly to establish common ground. That's how the dialogue would go.
Excellent. And I'm sorry if you can hear noise behind me. My cat is trying to get out of this room that I've got him in. I want to invite other folks that are typing in questions in the chat. I think it's hard for me to do your questions justice. If you can unmute. Lindsay Rawls, maybe I can go to you first.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if you could speak to, if you want to be culturally competent, look to your family and just the healing that can happen and, rediscovering traditions and then the inherent good. But what if there is also, trauma and pain also associated with traditions or with families? How does one navigate that or help someone else to navigate that?
Your first reaction to trauma is going to be based on what you learned in your family. I'm going to give permission for you to react to trauma any way you're able to. I'm going to give permission. I'm going to process those feelings with my patient. Whatever it is, I don't have a father that I can consult with. I don't want to talk to my mother because my mother was an alcoholic and she was very abusive. Now, every time my patient says that this is how my parents were, behind that is also a description of what they yearned for. I'm going to be responding to the yearning. I'm going to be supporting and validating the yearning for a whole family, the yearning to have someone to talk to, the yearning to have someone explain what could be unexplainable to you. Okay. I validate that. I support that. For patients who do not have a family where there is emotional cutoff, I don't like them. Era puro alcohólico. He was just an alcoholic. He was very abusive. No. I don't have a family, me dicen. This is what they tell me. With the assistance of my patient, I help create a family. And by that, I help create an extended family. Who do you feel comfortable with? Sometimes there is a priest that is humanistic. I want to use that deliberately. Humanistic and open and offers comfort. I'm going to recruit that person. Sometimes it is a teacher. Sometimes it is someone from work. I'm going to help create an extended family. I'm going to help them identify and list the close friends that they do have. May not be much, but I want to help them identify and list as a way of creating an image of social support. Because our family of origin is not something that I'm very proud of, I still have the need for kinship. And that's what I will move towards, creating that kinship. Is that pretty easy, Dr. T? No, that's very difficult. Because the patients that don't have that, the patients that come from that type of traumatic upbringing are naturally untrusting. So you're managing that. You're building the therapeutic alliance before you do anything else. They have to believe in you. Some patients will not believe in you at all, no matter what. No matter what. Those are the patients that have rejected you and rejected your help. Refer them to someone else. That's my thinking on that.
Excellent, Dr. Treviño. And I'm conscious of the time, and I think folks are just saying, wishing they would have more time to discuss with you. I mean, just the chat has been just a joy to watch. People just being like, yes, awesome. I can't believe this is so powerful.
I'm glad it was useful.
I think you validated a lot of the work that folks have done, a lot of the difficulties that we've faced in working with the Latinx community during this pandemic. And you've made it very relatable, I think, on a human level. And I love how you've kind of pushed it beyond just the evidence and the research and all these things, and making it about the human connection, which is really lovely. and I think validating for the folks on the call today. A lot of people saying one of the best webinars I've experienced. This was amazing.
Thank you.
So if you do want to carry on the conversation, there is Angel's email. I think we also can put out your email if that would be okay, Dr. Treviño, or folks can reach out to us.
No, absolutely. You can put my email up there.
Sure.
That's strevino@saludmentallatino.com.
And Angel, if I can have you unshare so I can share, and we'll do our closing slides. But thanks again also for driving the ship today for us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be able to share this wonderful knowledge, and I'm glad to have not been mistaken when I introduced Dr. Treviño and that you all love his exposition. Like Juan mentioned at the beginning, we have a separate evaluation from the CEUs, and we will be more than glad to have your feedback. It will help us to continue to provide training free of charge. So feel free to scan the QR code or use the link. It will help us a lot. So thank you, Juan, once again for having us today.
Awesome. Thank you, Angel. And Angel, if you have that link handy, you can drop it in the chat for folks in case people weren't able to capture the QR code. So we can direct folks. And just a reminder that we will also be sending you I gotta get my window here. We will also be sending you the hard for me to do things and talk at the same time. We will send you the questionnaire for Greensboro AHEC for your continuing education credits. But please don't sign off yet. We have some pretty big announcements. So stick with me for just 2 minutes that we want to share these interesting and exciting developments that are going on at La Mesita. But first of all, thanks again to Dr. Treviño. And I wonder if for those folks that are able, if you can unmute and do an audible clap, an audible virtual clap for Dr. Treviño and for Angel today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. That's, I think, the best we can do in this virtual land that we live in, but appreciate
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank you.
So we have, starting next month, our first ever La Mesita webinar series. So if some of you attended our conference and saw some of the stellar speakers that we had for that, you can kind of expect similar folks. In fact, some familiar faces will come back. So the webinar series is titled Enfrentando Barreras, or Overcoming Barriers, Addressing Intersectional Disparities in Latinx Mental Health Practice. And so this will be for April, May, and June, the fourth Friday of each month at our regular time, 10 to 11:30 a.m. Eastern. And the lineup that we have that we're excited to share with you all will be starting with Dr. Margarita Alegria, who works at the Disparities Institute in at Harvard University Medical Center. And she'll be talking about her work addressing disparities at all levels, from the individual therapy that we do to impacting policy through her wonderful research. So that will be for April. And then for May 28th, some of you all may be familiar and listen to Latinx Therapy podcasts. So we will have Adriana Alejandre, who is the creator and co-host, as well as Ariana Lozano, who is a member of Latinx Therapy and also identifies as a member of the LGBTQ community. And they'll be talking about the intersection of mental health and Latinx culture and LGBTQIA+ identities. And this will be less of a didactic webinar and more of a conversation. So we really hope you join us for that. And then June 25th, we'll bring back Drs. Nayeli Chavez Dueñas and Hector Adames, who presented in our conference, and they'll be talking about hope, possibilities, and strengths, anti-colonial healing approaches for Latinos. And this touches on a little bit of what Dr. Treviño talked about, these kind of generational even dating back to colonial times, these injuries that the Latino community still holds on to and carries, and how we can address that in a culturally responsive manner. So the other big change is that in order to remain sustainable, so all these La Mesita webinars, all of our programming is provided by grant funding, which, as you all know, is not constant or permanent. And so we have done some research and received consultation on what's the most competitive or not competitive, the most equitable way of pricing our webinars. So moving forward, starting with this conference, we will begin charging for our webinars. We hope you'll stick with us. There will be discounts. So the regular price is $30, but if you join our network, and I put the link to join our network in the chat, and Sophia, if you can put it back in for folks, it's free to join, and then you stay in touch with everything that we're doing and all the announcements of our programming. We also offer student pricing. And so there'll be a discount, so you can pay attention to the network. We'll announce the series shortly. I think we already have, actually. But you can sign up for all three, and there'll be a discount associated with that. And then we also will offer some needs-based scholarships that you can apply for. So we hope you stick with us and just understand that we're doing this so that we can continue delivering on the quality, like what you saw today from Dr. Treviño, for many, many years to come with our work. So there is the website, la-mesita.mn.co. You log on, create a quick profile, and then you're connected. Super simple, it takes about 2 minutes. So yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you again, Dr. Treviño and Angel, for a wonderful presentation today. We will have the recording of today's webinar under topics, recordings of La Mesita webinars, and I'll just do a brief demo of that because sometimes people I know have difficulty finding it. So this is what our network